So good morning to you all. Let me begin by thanking the invitation of the ICD and the kind hospitality. And in fact, somehow I will build on the comprehensive contribution of our previous speaker, the Secretary General of the Club of Madrid. And the first point I would like to make is that democracy is an unfinished job. In fact, democracy has changed a lot since the very beginning, but one thing we can be certain of is that it will change more in the future. And in fact, democracy has to change in order to face the challenges that we have nowadays. In historical perspective, even if we don't go to the ancient Greece, but the representative democracy builds on the parliamentary British tradition. And then it is also based on the liberal political thinking that inspired both the American and the French revolutions in the late 18th century. And from there, this political thinking inspired a number of liberal revolutions throughout the 19th century, and the wave of liberal constitutions. But at the time, the representation was understood in the so-called classical way, meaning that representation was based on a limited or restricted suffrage. That meant that politics, the right to vote, and the right to rule were mostly a matter for illustrated gentlemen. Depending on literacy, education, depending on wealth, and of course, depending on gender. It goes without saying that at that time, enormous parts of the population were simply excluded from the political system, and so excluded, in fact, from representation. That was the so-called representative government at the time. Then in the 20th century, there was a significant development with the movement towards universal suffrage. And it was a difficult conquest. It took some time. But it was impossible for the political establishment to resist this organized strength of excluded crowds asking for a meaningful popular sovereignty, asking to have a say in the way power is organized and exercised. So universal suffrage made the difference, and it became the pattern of modern democracy. In fact, the expression democracy should also only be applied when we do have universal suffrage. That's why traditionally there's this distinction between classical representative government and true democracy. Was that the end of the story? No, by no means. In fact, even with this development, the idea that there is a crisis of representation was always a topic for discussion in our democracies. As if, again, even after those developments, democracy remained an unfinished job. And mostly in the 50s and even more in the 60s, there was a huge movement towards more significant participation beyond even the right to vote every 4 or every 5 years. And it was finally understood that the political parties were not able to represent the diversity of interests and other forms of social organization should have a say in the way decision-making operates. And then we change substantially the procedures for decision-making with more mechanisms of participation. Organic participation, procedural participation, as if we need to do something more in order to ensure the legitimacy of the political decisions, as if the right to vote was not enough for that. So this idea inspired a number of relevant changes in our democracy. Was that the end of the story? Again, no. We still see that there is a discontent with representation, a feeling that representation is not working, is not sufficient, and that people don't feel themselves represented by the politicians. And so we see that today, once again, I would say, democracy is under fire by a number of controversies and discontent that we have in our modern societies. So what is the picture that we can see now? Representative democracy continues to be an issue of discussion, as if it was the nature of the beast. So an unfinished job, a never-ending story, something that we do need to improve always. From low turnout in elections, less interest of young people in politics, to reduced party membership, from the lack of trust in politicians to the decline or even collapse of mainstream traditional political parties and the rise of the extremes, in particular the rise of populism. The signs of this crisis are everywhere, and there is no point in denying. And moreover, after 3 major crises, the financial crisis, the pandemic, and now the war in Ukraine with the cost of living crisis, we can observe and even say that it is understandable that there is an accumulation of discontent among people due to a generalized economic and social downturn. But moreover, there is a general feeling that this downturn, perhaps it is not so temporary. It might be, some people might think, the beginning of a steep decline in the living conditions of people, which motivates feelings of insecurity about the future. In fact, populist voters tend to be both angry and pessimistic. They believe the past was better than the present and are quite nervous about the future. And from fear to fury, we know it's only one step away, in particular when we can see the rise of shocking inequalities. So it's easy for populism. Populism explores the rising discontent and people's sentiments of insecurity and directs this frustration and resentment against politicians, suggesting an alleged confrontation between the people and the so-called elite. In fact, economic and cultural explanations for this behavior are not mutually exclusive. Simple slogans, magical remedies can sound very appealing in these very difficult and challenging circumstances. And furthermore, this movement tends to spread, and this is particularly dangerous because it spreads into mainstream politics, capturing the agenda of the traditional political parties in the center. So discontent against democracy are also fueled, and we cannot understand what's going on without paying attention to this, are also fueled by the media and the social networks, often based on pure fake news, disinformation campaigns, and even deliberate interference in democratic elections. Digital communication and social media can, of course, be important tools for participatory democracy and individual empowerment, but they can also be weapons against democratic systems. Inside the European Union itself, the so-called illiberal democracy is presented as a serious alternative political model, even if clearly against fundamental European political values and principles. Principles as the rule of law, the separation of powers, and freedom of expression. The rulers of these new illiberal democracies often muzzle the opposition, restrict public freedom, beginning with the freedom of the press. They promote hate speech, marginalize groups of citizens based on ethnicity, national origin, religion, and try to control the judiciary and weaken the independence of constitutional courts. All this, of course, is a pure denial of liberal democracy. And we see that in many countries, minorities, migrants, refugees, they have to fight hard for their place in our European democracies. And if we look outside Europe, well, in the United States, the country of the American Revolution, the country of Thomas Paine, George Washington, the country of John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, a president, an elected president, tried to block the democratic transition of power, leading an enormous crowd to invade the Capitol, and many, too many, I would say, still deny today the electoral results. In Brazil, we saw something quite similar not very long ago. And if we look beyond these cases, well, we can say that somehow half of the world population lives under authoritarian regimes. In fact, 20% of the world population lives in two countries, Russia and China, both authoritarian regimes. And Russia was mentioned, the case of Soviet Union and Gorbachev. It looked to be a triumph of democracy, but not so fast. The situation is as it is. Now, with this picture, quite naturally, discontent with representative democracy tends to lead to the demand of more participation, and rightly so. But easily, the demand for more participation risks to lead to the illusion of direct democracy. Even more now that we have available many mechanisms for digital participation, including online voting, the so-called e-democracy. Of course, we know that besides a few countries where meaningful elements of direct democracy are applied, and Switzerland is the classic example, citizens' direct participation in lawmaking tends to be exceptional and mainly through referendums. No doubt, together with other mechanisms for citizen participation beyond voting, referendums can be and should be part of the toolbox for more participation. But they will always remain exceptional instruments for quite specific issues where it is possible to present a straightforward choice between yes and no. On the other hand, digital participation and citizens' assemblies are, of course, of utmost importance in modern democracies, allowing for a more open and inclusive debate, but they cannot ensure a democratic mandate, and they cannot, therefore, replace representative democracy. So, representative democracy remains the political system where we have to build the political solutions that can meet citizens' expectations. For that to happen, we have first to listen to what citizens have to say. That is why we in the European Union have launched the so-called Conference on the Future of Europe, an important democratic exercise, giving people a say about the future of the European project, using a digital platform where over 50,000 users share ideas and also organizing several citizens' panels. It was, I must say, an unprecedented democratic exercise which mobilized thousands of citizens, local and European elected representatives, NGOs, institutions, civil society, and so on. And also in a direct dialogue between citizens and political decision makers. One of the conclusions of this debate was that we need to have in Europe a more participatory democracy if we want to have a representative democracy with less democratic deficit. Again, it was not about replacing representative democracy by anything else, but to improve and deepen the representative democracy so that people can be engaged in decision-making beyond voting. True, we have already a number of mechanisms of this kind. We have the so-called European Citizens Initiative, petitions, a wide range of public consultations, but we need more inclusive mechanisms for participation, including through periodic citizens' assemblies and digital tools, and, by the way, also to provide better information about those mechanisms. And to conclude, let me say that democracy is, as I said, a work in progress, has to be improved towards a more participatory democracy if it is to provide a sense of belonging. But make no mistake, to tackle the root causes of discontent, democracy cannot offer a pure management of the status quo. On the contrary, it has to face the political challenge of delivering results and addressing people's concerns, starting with inequalities. Otherwise, it will always be difficult to fight populism and rebuild trust in democratic institutions. But having said this, let me also say that this is not only a political challenge. It is also a cultural challenge. If democracy is now under fire, it is also because we might be losing the battle for our values and ideals. And this battle is not only a job for politicians. In fact, it is really a fundamental cultural battle. And knowing that this event takes place in parallel with the Berlin Film Festival, I would like to underline that all forms of art, including film, have been effective and inspiring vehicles to promote democracy, justice, and human rights, even if only showing reality as it is and inviting us to think twice about the world we live in and how it could or it should be. So we all can do our part. Democracy, I believe, is an unfinished job, but it is our job. Not because democracy is perfect, that's not the case, but simply because it is the best system that we can have for creating a better future for all. So, thank you very much.
Very much, Vice President Silva Pereira. Do we have questions? The gentleman in the back.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the very insightful speech. I'm Ibrahim, and I'm a student here in ICT. My question is that I just want your opinion on this hypothesis. Do you think the countries which are suffering currently from democratic instability and autocracy, are they in the same position as the European countries were like before 700 years? For Great Britain, it took them around 600 or 500 years to build the current parliamentary system since the inception of Magna Carta to protect the rights of bourgeoisie. So can you put some insight on this? Thank you.
Well, I think this is really not fair to make historical comparisons of that kind. If you ask me, is there hope for those countries that live under authoritarian regimes and not yet on democracies? Yes, I would say there's hope, not only because they've started later, but because I believe in the values of democracy, and I believe that sooner or later, perhaps later than sooner, many of them will find out the values of democracy, as simple as that. But the real problem is that some of those authoritarian regimes are now trying to sell the idea that they can deliver better results. which is, of course, arguable, but this is the case. We saw this being made in the last few years as if there were two alternatives there, and well, we can choose either of them, as if there was not an issue about human rights or other important values, and it was all about results, comparing the level of economic growth in those countries. Of course, that this is an approach that has to be refused, not only because this understanding of development is and should be discussed, but also because there's a fundamental difference there that has to do, as I said, with human rights, with values, and it is not an issue that can be changed by any other consideration. So I would say, and I would hope that those countries will make their progress. I think that we have to do our part in order to help them to move into that direction. The efforts that are being made at the multilateral level, the European Union with its political and even economic relationship with those countries. Nowadays, trade agreements are trade agreements of a new generation. They have concerns with the sustainable development, with human rights, with cultural values. So we have a number of instruments that we can use and we should use more in order to promote this kind of change. But in the end, it's up to the people to make their choices. We have to respect different cultures. We have to respect different choices. But those who believe in the values of democracy, I believe that they will do their best in order to promote those values all over the world. In the meantime, let's also show some concern about our own situation. Because if we have a deficit of democracy, if we have illiberal democracies inside the European Union, that doesn't help in our exercise of promoting democracy all over the world.
Do people really find out that this is the best model and it's more a matter of optimism and we believe in this and trust in it will succeed? It reminds me a bit of end of history, that in the end we will all find out that the Western model is the superior one. If, according to Freedom House, and we got a long political analysis yesterday by President Ivanov, democracy is in decline, or what we define as democracy, then apparently there are a number of what you describe as it's under fire and it is in defense that would lead to the opposite conclusion. And I think it has a lot to do with the circumstances and how we treat people and who is interested in undermining the conditions under which democracies can work. So just to hope that people will find out is a bit like what we discussed in the morning about will vegan nutrition succeed, or do we just hope for the best? And I wonder if this is sufficient. So coming back to the core of what you presented, like the work on can we improve the very practical expression of European democracy in the European Union, which goes straight to the heart of what you're working on. You called the Conference for the Future of Europe an unprecedented example of an improvement of democracy. How many of you have heard of the Conference for the Future of Europe? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And how many actively participated? Because this was not just, hey, let's discuss how we can improve the European Union and improve democracy, but you could actively engage, you can enroll. It wasn't difficult to sign up, to register on the platform, and this platform was a major achievement in terms of technology and bringing citizens into a dialogue with politicians, because it used artificial intelligence to translate in real time what has been discussed in Finland with Portuguese and in Maltese with Lithuanians, and you did not need to know the language because the system would provide you with what has been just commented. So I was blown away to see how easy it is to have something like a cross-European, pan-European dialogue. But as you rightly said, it was 50,000 participants with, I don't know, a few 100,000 comments. And when you look through the ranking, the top contribution came from the European Trade Union Organization, because they knew how to organize their members to push hard for this is what we ask for. And then you had a highly selective body of people who know better what's good for us, who do the filtering and look through all the different contributions to tell us what the conclusions are, and then we put it in the pipeline, and then we, 446 million EU citizens, we look at what the ones who know better tell us about the future reform of the system. So as great as it is to think about how technology can help to bridge the gap between those who are not active or don't know how to interact with citizens or don't have the privilege to come to conferences of the ICD, where it's easy to directly communicate with members of parliament. But at the end of the day, it was not even a percentage. And of the percentage, it was the privileged few who know how to register, the digital natives, the ones who have other hobbies but watching Barca or what else you can do with your free time. And then we present this as an unprecedented example of improving democracy. If we take citizens seriously, I think it needs a bit more than just claiming that we also use democracy and make more active participation possible. I think I wasn't taken seriously when I looked at how it was designed and what the result was, although I belong to the privileged ones who know how to play the game. I even organized events because one could not only comment, you could actively engage and bring people on board and discuss things and make proposals of the list of 10 priorities that were necessary to structure the whole process a bit.
Okay, may I now react?
Now you can react.
Well, what I said was that the conference was an unprecedented exercise of participative democracy. And if you can show me an example where you had a movement of participation that was wider than this one, larger than this one, more significant than this one, I can reflect on the statement that this was unprecedented. So I'm just saying that it was the best that was ever made. Not saying it was perfect, and but I also said it was a conference. It was a conference. So the idea that we could do more than a conference is in itself an ambition that perhaps it is not reasonable. We are talking about launching a debate in all over Europe with people speaking different languages and participating in a discussion about the future of Europe. So this has limitations. And that's why I say that any form of participative democracy will not replace direct democracy, nor a representative democracy. It cannot. Of course, we had these panels all over Europe with people coming from different places, from NGOs, trade unions, but also anonymous citizens. Many of them was the first time that they were participating in such a debate. But of course, they didn't have a democratic mandate. I'm not expecting that 800 guests in citizens' panels can represent 450 million of people. For that, we have the elections. That's the only way I know where people directly can choose representatives. So I think that, was that a joke? No, it was not a joke. The Conference on the Future of Europe allows for a more inclusive debate than the one we normally have. A more open debate. People that have less chance to participate had that chance to participate. Should we have a system where this participative democracy should replace representative democracy? I don't see one coming. I just think that we benefit from giving people opportunities to participate. And this was done in the Conference on the Future of Europe. But as I said, we have many other instruments of participation in the European Union. We have public consultations in a number of legislative initiatives. People organize themselves to participate, trade unions, NGOs, environmental organizations, they participate. When I am designated as rapporteur of any file, trade agreement, for instance, in the following weeks, a huge range of NGOs and business organizations, they ask to have an exchange of views about the project. So there are a number of mechanisms for participation. We have to improve them. I would agree, but I don't think that it was a problem of design, that we only had 50,000 or 100,000 of contributions. It's the nature of the thing. We cannot have a conference that is more than a conference and is allowing for a mechanism to replace a representative democracy. So let's be serious about it. Representative democracy remains the fundamental tool to channel legitimation of power. This is, of course, not enough. Vote every 4 and 5 years. We have to have more mechanisms of participation, and we have to develop them. We have to give more information about the mechanisms that are available. But this is a contribution for a more inclusive democracy. And that's already a very high ambition if we compare to the past. A more inclusive political debate, a more inclusive participation that goes beyond voting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The lady in the front.
Yes, my name is Salima Belhe. I'm a member of Dutch Parliament. And I have a lot of respect for what you just told, because I really understand how difficult it is already on national level. I was wondering if you could reflect on the anti-European sentiments that's being advocated in different countries on national level, which I can imagine also makes it difficult to be heard by people what Europe can mean. Do you recognize, and could you reflect something, some thoughts on what national parliaments are doing wrong or could do better?
Well, of course, that in the last 20 years, there was a rise of Eurosceptic movements and parties in the European democracy. We even had Brexit, and Brexit, of course, was also a consequence of this attitude against the European project. It is somehow easy in this populist discourse to attack politicians, and I would say it is even more easy to blame Europe for anything that goes wrong and to praise national politics for anything that goes a little bit better. I think that Eurosceptic movements are based on an illusion. an illusion that we would be better off if we could go back to our borders, if we could build our own solutions. And I say this is an illusion because I don't see any of the major problems of our societies being better solved in an isolated manner without European cooperation. I don't think that climate change would be better addressed if we go back to our borders. I don't see that even the refugees issues can be better solved that way because we have transnational problems to address. So I think that the Eurosceptic movements, they do present a challenge for the European project, but they try to sell an illusion. When Brexit happened, many people thought that perhaps it would be a beginning of a domino effect. That didn't happen. Also, that didn't happen because after 7 years, because Brexit happened 3 years ago, but the Brexit referendum took place already in 2016, so 7 years ago. And these 7 years have been a nightmare in the UK, if I can put it that way, with several prime ministers, crisis, and the illusion that was sold to people is now in front of their eyes. The British economy is the only one of the G7 that is not growing, even if slightly, it is not growing. And the idea that some trade agreements could replace the relationship, the economic relationship between the UK and the neighbor economy, European economy, has proven to be an illusion. So, yes, I'm worried with that because I see them in the European Parliament and in national politics. They represent, well, the extreme right in the European Parliament represents about 10%. But we have other political elements that are also Eurosceptic in other political families. So in the end, if we say that we have 20% Eurosceptics in the European Parliament, that would be more close to the truth. So this is worrying. And again, how can we face it? Well, again, delivering better results to tackle discontent of people, but also fighting for the European project, the ideas, the values, and explaining to people that illusions will not solve any problem.
I would have a number of more questions, but I also get a signal that after food for thought, food is ready. So join me in a round of applause. Thank you very much for your presentation.